So welcome everyone to the third webinar in our 2018 series. We have Teresa McClenahan from the Canadian Environmental Law Association as our presenter today, and this is a follow-up to a 2017 webinar on the 3 waste projects being undertaken by the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Teresa is our presenter, and I have muted everyone to avoid background noise. I'm just going to unmute Teresa, important. And we'll get underway. So thank you, Teresa. Go ahead.
Thanks, Brene. Welcome, everyone. And so what I'm doing today is an update from the presentation I did last year in the Nuclear Waste Watch series, the No Nuclear Waste series. And so last year we spoke about the 3 Chalk River Nuclear Laboratories projects. And what I've done this year is update from that. You'll see some of the same slides again, and then I've tried to give a status update about where we're at with each one. But I'm assuming that not everyone completely involved in all of these projects, so a refresher might be useful for some of you as well. Brene, if there's any issue about sound quality, just come on and tell me so, because I don't have the chat displayed.
Yeah, you're fine, thanks.
So what we're going to do today is go over the projects that are currently undergoing federal environmental assessment, the Nuclear Waste Project, talk about what's happened in the last year, review a few concerns that CELA and a few others have raised, just to give a flavor of those. There is no way we can go through all of the serious concerns, and there are many in all 4 projects in the time we have, but just to kind of flag the kinds of things people are raising and what we saw in our review on some of them. Look a little bit about what the federal reviewers have been asking CNL to do and respond to, talk about the current status of the projects, what opportunities there might be for further intervention and timelines, and then hope we have some time for discussion. So there are the 4 projects I'm going to review: the Chalk River Near Surface Disposal Facility on the Chalk River site, the Rolphton Demonstration Nuclear Power Plant on the Ottawa River near Deep River, the Whiteshell Research Reactor on the Winnipeg River, and the Deep Geological Repository near Kincardine on Lake Huron. So starting from the Near Surface Disposal Facility, and most of this slide you saw before, a proposal had been made for low and intermediate level waste. It originally actually was for low waste, and then they added an intermediate level waste. And then as of this past fall, CNL says it will not include intermediate level waste after all. And there's a link there to see that statement from Chalk River Nuclear Laboratories, which has been posted on the CA registry as well. As we'll discuss later, there's still an issue about whether the remaining waste, some of it would actually meet the definition of intermediate waste, but as far as a project intention, they're saying it's not intended to take intermediate waste now. So it's located, as I mentioned, right on the near vicinity of the Ottawa River, on the existing Chalk River site. And these are screen grabs from the project proposal, so the quality is not that high, with my apologies. And the sites that are being considered are within 1 or 3 kilometers of the river, and of course all of the surface drainage within that proximity is to the river. So they had wanted the facility to be ready to accept waste by 2020. As you'll see as we go, that's not very likely the time frame now. But once they, if they get approval, once they would operate it, their intent would be to operate it for 50 years. now taking low-level radioactive waste, but we do have concerns that many have expressed that this waste, much of this waste is still long-lived and highly toxic, and questions about whether all of it would actually meet the definitions of low-level radioactive waste. Not that there are good definitions in Canada, but to the extent we have some definitions in CSA standards and international guidance. So half of the waste was intended to come from current and past operations of CNL or ACL, and another half was intended to come from future waste, including commercial waste, and that would presumably be low-level waste according to their recent statements. And the proposal would include collecting leachate and treating it in a wastewater treatment facility with a designed operation of 50 years. So this is from their proposal. You saw this before. It looks just like a standard domestic landfill. And similarly, the base and cover leachate collection system is pretty much standard for a domestic municipal waste landfill. So the objections that have been raised along the way ever since this has been proposed include its very large size, its proximity to ground and surface water, including proximity to the Ottawa River, the fact that this proposal is coming from a private consortium with questions about long-term institutional control, accountability, funding, and much else, lack of clarity that continues about the waste characterization, its location in an active seismic zone, the potential for transporting off-site waste to this site from a variety of locations, the capabilities of the treatment system to actually deal with radioactive substances. So there had been a project proposal, and many of us commented on that, and then following that there was a draft EIS, and public comments were provided on that, and before that there was an intervention process. So some parties, including us, have some very limited funding for participating in this process. So after the public and Indigenous comments were posted, they're all posted on the CEA registry. You can see those, and I have a number of links throughout the presentation to the CEA registry. But I always find the fastest thing to do is just to put CEA registry, just like I have it there on the slide, in my Google browser, and when I get there I just go in to either Ontario, Manitoba, whichever project I want to use, and just click on the project. The federal review then was conducted by the CNSC and other federal departments, and their review was posted online on the CEA registry at the end of August. And so I reviewed all 190 comments at the time when it was posted, and I was struck by how substantive and basically fundamental to the concept of the proposal those comments were, and many of them do repeat some of the themes that the public and Indigenous communities have made as well. And a lot of the comments go to things like the actual design of the project, or the description of the environment, or the potential for adverse effects or failure. So things that are meant to be at the core of an environmental assessment and are still, according to our view and according to these comments, not adequate. So I just chose the first two out of all 190 federal comments to give you some examples. And those are two quotes from the federal review. So the first one says, so far there's no exact indication on how deep the waste would be emplaced, the grade and elevation of the engineered containment mound relative to existing area grades and topography. And that is, completely fundamental to any landfill type, typical landfill type design. And the second comment, comment number 2, and all of these comments then come with action items or requirements from the federal reviewers to CNL with more information that they want or more work that they want. So comment number 2 was this one: the sand overburden could be subject to liquefaction under earthquake loading. When liquefied, the sand could lose all of its shear strength, leading to failure of the environmental containment mound and other structures and components associated with the proposed near surface disposal facility. And of course, they'd like a response from CNL on that. So comments, like that, many other topics go on for 190 pages of the federal, 190 items of the federal review. And then, of course, you can also see the very, very good comments from all of the public reviewers. So a status update was posted to the CEA registry for the near surface disposal facility. And it says that CNL is currently considering all federal and public comments and information requests, and therefore the schedule will be delayed, and a revised schedule will be published when it's available. And accordingly, there are no currently available dates as to when the final EIS or EA report would be published, nor when the public intervention on that EA report would occur, the accompanying licensing documents would be available, or when the hearing would be held. So turning to the next proposal by CNL, it's a proposal for Whiteshell, and this is right on the edge of the Winnipeg River in right near Whiteshell Provincial Park in Manitoba, right near Pinawa. It's 100 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg, and the Winnipeg River, of course, flows into Lake Winnipeg and then eventually to the Arctic. And Lake Winnipeg is at the bottom of a very huge watershed from much of Western Canada. It went into service in 1965 as a research reactor, shut down 20 years later, and as I mentioned last year, had already undergone an environmental assessment and already has an approval for decommissioning, and the facility would be completely removed under that approval. Some waste would have remained in interim storage, but the rest would go to offsite facilities. So now CNL is operating Whiteshell under the GOCO contract that Ole Hendrickson has done such a great job analyzing. And that's a time-limited arrangement whereby CNL is operating many of the former AECL, well, still owned by AECL facilities on behalf of the federal government. So this new project proposal wants to change the approach from that currently approved EA to an approach that would leave the reactor in place in perpetuity. They're calling it in situ decommissioning, and it's exactly the same proposal for Rolphton, which I'll get to later. So they'll take any contaminated material from above grade that's there into the below grade facility, and then they want to completely grout, so fill all crevices, rooms, compartments with grout to encase in place all of the radioactive and non-radioactive materials that remain on the site, and then put a cover over top of that whole grouted facility. So as I mentioned, this EA that's underway is about the changes they want to undertake to that previously approved approach. And in the current proposal then, with these changes, they would leave low-level waste that's currently in some trenches on the property in place, leaving it to decay over the 200 years they're estimating for that material, and leave the low-level sediment radioactive contamination, I haven't analyzed that, they call it low-level, in place in the Winnipeg River where it is. So that's a schematic from the project proposal showing the building and the reactor vessel. So the fuel is no longer there, nor the heavy water, but the building and the reactor vessel and so on are still all there. So the fuel is in storage on site, and the heavy water is at the Chalk River site. And the radioactive hazard consists of the vessel systems components. And so there are some descriptions in the project proposal, as I reviewed last year, with some of their numbers, but one of the previously employed scientists from that site has provided some submissions to CNSC on this project that are posted on the CEA registry. And he's noting that this statement of the inventory is very old and comes from old modeling, not from empirical testing, and furthermore that the project description doesn't indicate what is the safety significance of these compounds. What they're saying in terms of why they want to take this new approach is because it's a new approach, basically. And furthermore, they outline some advantages, such as including reduced exposure to workers, reduced transportation costs, eliminating nuclear liability from interim storage, reducing long-term liability, and say they'll return the facility to ACL for long-term institutional control at the end of the project. And this is from the project proposal, the timeline they hope to pursue. So they're proceeding along with the EA and the licensing and hope to be in a position to start preparing the site for in situ decommissioning next year. So the issues related to that proposal are its adjacency to the river, the no characterization in the material so far about what would be emitted to the river. There had been a serious accident at the site in 1978, and the project does not describe the implications from those levels of contamination and for the environment and long-term exposure to the ecosystem and the public. And the approach, of course, is unproven. There are concerns around leaching, failure of the grout, release to the environment would set a poor precedent. So again, the group of scientists that had worked there did write to CNSC to note that there are intermediate level wastes on this site that have long half-lives. I think later there's a note about how does that comply with IAEA guidance for the appropriateness of near-surface facilities. It's in an unconsolidated sedimentary formation, so they didn't think a safety case could be made. And if you look at the links I'll give you in a moment, you'll see documents where CNSC has transmitted many of the public and Indigenous questions to CNL for response, and have included requests that, among many, many things, they respond to Dr. Baumgartner's questions as to source term, and also respond to Dr. Turner's questions about the inconsistency with IAEA guidance as to appropriate use of entombment, i.e. not being appropriate for anything except really catastrophic accident scenarios. They've also asked CNL to respond to concerns that Dr. Turner and CELA had noted in the public comments that the project may not meet CNSC's own clearance standards by the end of the institutional control period in 100 years, and about CELA's concerns about the exposures to the public and the environment that would arise during the actual process of entombing the reactor that we don't think have been adequately described or assessed. And again, just as in the prior case, I would note that these are just a mere tiny sampling of the requests transmitted to CNL for this project of the 230 information requests in that case that arose from the public and Indigenous comments. And then there are another 30 requests that CNSC says it itself will answer that are also posted to the CEA registry. So in terms of the status of the Whiteshell EA, the CNSC has published, as I mentioned, a review of those comments and transmitted the request to CNL, the ones they chose to transmit, and there were many. The administrative agreement, the latest version of it that's on the CEA registry, indicates submission of the final EIS next month, but that likely is now delayed because the rest of the most recent schedule looks like it's at a minimum 2 months behind. So that's just me guessing that, that's not them saying that. And then there would be provision for the federal reviews of the final EIS document that CNL puts forward, as well as the public opportunity to review, opportunity to apply to intervene at the hearing, You don't have to already have intervener funding to apply to intervene at the hearing. You can just go ahead and do that with a letter explaining what you'd like to address. And the hearing, but it's not time to do that yet because they haven't published the final EIS or called for that application. The hearing on that schedule is sitting at October 3rd to 4th, although it's not on the CNSC calendar at this point. They don't go out beyond June when I looked at it. But again, I don't see that that schedule will be maintained because not only were they a couple months behind posting all of these comments, but then I'm not sure CNL could turn around their responses to all of those comments in the time frame that had been anticipated in the administrative agreement. And so there are probably multiple reasons that make me think it will not happen in October. But please don't rely on me saying that because maybe they'll work hard and try to make it happen then. So then the third CNL project that we're talking about today is the Rolphton Nuclear Demonstration Reactor EA. So it's almost a cookie cutter of the Whiteshell EA proposal, an in situ proposal. So this is a photo from Highway 17 talking about the historic event when the first commercial nuclear demonstration reactor was turned on and it became the CANDU technology. It too operated for just over 20 years, 25 years, and it too is located immediately next to one of Canada's major rivers, namely the Ottawa River, upstream of the Chalk River facility that the near surface proposal is planned for, and of course where the existing other activities such as NRU and NRX and so on have been or are operating. So this was from the project proposal, what the building looks like during operation. So again, same proposal, they intend to leave the radioactive materials, well, with a caveat that I'll discuss in a moment, leave the radioactive materials in place that are there now and grout them all in place to the extent practicable. And this gives you a picture of just how close this facility is to the river. There's actually a pipe that goes, we've had a couple of site tours, and there's a pipe that goes from one of the lower level grades out to the river, which has been blocked, but it was close enough that obviously it was taking in and expelling cooling water from the Ottawa River. So this is the property schematic showing its location near the river. So the spent fuel and heavy water are down the river at the other main Chalk River facility in storage at the moment. The project description again included some of the outline of some of the dominant radionuclides as they saw it. And their reasons for undertaking this project in the way they're proposing it is similar to the ones that they provided for Whiteshell. These projects are obviously proceeding hand in hand in tandem, at almost the same time. Rapid reduction, they say, of the nuclear liabilities, both short and long term. They say there would be reduced transportation and waste handling risks, reduced costs for the taxpayer, risks for worker, and the only disadvantage they noted in their original draft EIS was long-term monitoring. They didn't note the novelty of the approach or uncertainties at all, in the project description at least. And they state that there is a lack of options for disposal of nuclear waste in Canada, and that's a rationale for the project. So this timeline is obviously not going to be met, but in the project proposal, they had hoped to be at the point this year where they would be starting their grout batch mixing and grouting this year and next year. So of course, many of the same issues as for Whiteshell, and the project description itself noted the potential of migration of radionuclides to the Ottawa River. This hadn't been assessed. This facility is also located in Glacial Till, and they say there will be long-term care and maintenance for an agreed performance period. So again, long-term institutional control is an issue that we're worried about, and many others, for this facility, just as at Whiteshell. So in terms of both projects have had many comments from the public and Indigenous communities, many comments, really substantive, thoughtful comments. So I had hoped when I was preparing this webinar that I could give you a good sampling of what everyone was saying, and I rapidly decided when I looked at them that I could not do that justice. And so I'll just give you a few of ours, and then a few of the ones from the Federal Review. So we talked about the lack of traceability around their bottom line conclusion that these two in situ projects are the preferred alternative as a means to deal with the waste. And an example of that was no dose estimates or quantitative data on the non-radiological effects of the alternatives, failure to apply the precautionary principle, in particular failure to provide for adaptive management in all aspects of alternative assessment. So if something goes wrong or you find out something new, what do you do about it? And which alternatives, best provide for that kind of flexibility and responsiveness for this kind of waste. They fail to show that the proposal is based on proven technology. The monitoring programs they propose don't match the very long timeframes of the radioactivity of the waste. They haven't provided sufficient data to say that the barriers that they're engineering will match the rate of decay of the waste over time. And inadequate provision for protecting ground and surface water, both regionally and downstream at both facilities. And then, of course, given the extremely long time frame for much of the hazard, inadequate provision to transmit information and capacity to future generations. We also said there was no quantitative cumulative effects analysis, no explanation of how the limited adverse effects were compared to select a preferred means, alternative means. And we give an example there with the aquatic environment, and pointed out, as others have, that the IAEA safety standards says that entombment is not a suitable means for decommissioning. It's not a decommissioning strategy. They say it's only suitable in exceptional cases, such as following a catastrophic reactor accident. You might remember that that's what's happened in various ways, both after the Chernobyl accident and after the parts of the Fukushima accident. Our analysis also indicated that the radioactive nuclide inventories were likely underestimated in the EIS, that much of the waste was improperly characterized as low level and may actually be more properly characterized as intermediate level if we look at other guidance. That according to IAEA guidance, near surface facilities, which this would also be, so not only entombment but near surface, is not appropriate to dispose of intermediate level waste. Again, that the CNSC's unconditional clearance levels, excuse me, would be exceeded even after the point of monitoring and control. And an odd circumstance that very high tritium emissions are continuing in the level of many gigabecquerels per year to the surrounding air and water from the shutdown reactor at Rolphton, and they're not declining, and this isn't explained in the EIS, and nor how the proposal will deal with that, or whether the proposal properly understands the reason for that. Again, this EIS also anticipates expressly that the grout and the barriers would degrade over time and relies then on dilution and dispersion, and we think that's inappropriate. The grout properties and formulations have not been determined and are not provided, and again, this is very fundamental to the proposal, and yet that information is not available. And the actual impact of putting such a mass of grout and concrete on that surface, both at Winnipeg River and Ottawa River, has not been assessed, and what will happen to the soil ground and subsurface around there. Also at Rolphton, in particular, there isn't certainty about whether the calandria, the reactor core, where most of the radioactivity is actually contained, will be removed or not. It had been indicated it would remain in place, but since then, in another document, the Post-Closure Safety Assessment Report, CNL, has indicated the possibility that it might be removed before entombment. It doesn't appear a decision was made yet, and then wouldn't form part of the waste inventory. And if that is the alternative they intend to pursue, it's not indicated when they would do that and what impact that would have on the whole range of impacts that arise during the actual process of entombment and grouting to the environment, ecosystem, human health, and workers. So again, the federal government has also undertaken its review by various departments, including the CNSC, and those are posted as of last month on the CELA registry, and I give you the link there. Again, in addition to the public comments, there are extensive comments and information requests. And so again, I'll just give you 3 out of 1.5 pages of an 82-page review document. So one comment states that CNL's definition of grout, its actual definition of grout, never mind not having the formula, appears incomplete and inaccurate. Another comment notes that in several respects, fundamental geology is technically erroneous, and states that the distance between the facility and the Ottawa River is not given, despite a requirement to describe the environment that might be adversely affected, such as, sorry, there's a typo there, such as proximity to a water body. So, there are 82 pages of these kinds of comments and requests for more information from CNL on this project as well. So on the schedule for Rolphton, again, there's an administrative agreement about the timelines, which was recently revised, December or January, but it's already out of date as of now. Such as it is, it specifies various dates through spring to fall, with the submission of a final EIS in English in June and in French in July, preparation of the draft EA report and the licensing review by the CNSC in September this year, submission by the proponent in October, an intervention period for the public in the fall, and the hearing currently scheduled for December. It had previously been scheduled for January this year on a long ago revised schedule. Big open question about whether any of this will remain, in fact, the dates that follow. So finally, a couple more slides left, just looking at the status of the Deep Geological Repository, the 4th project. So this one is proposed by Ontario Power Generation. This photo comes right off the CELA registry when you land on their list of documents. And as you can see, it's about 1 kilometer from Lake Huron, near Kincardine, Ontario, right at the site of the Bruce nuclear plant. And it's proposed for low and intermediate level radioactive waste. I'm not going to go into the whole description of this project or the history, because I'm assuming most of the people in this webinar are well familiar with this one. The main thing I think it's important to do today is just give the current status update. So last summer, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation wrote to the federal minister, who has the decision in front of her to make in terms of whether to accept the joint review panel report and recommendations, along with CELA agency report and recommendations to follow, based on all of the information in front of her. And so they wrote to her with that letter, and then she wrote to OPG as a result the next month. And you can see both of those letters there at those links. In her letter, she commended OPG for the 2013 agreement it had reached. You might remember, if you were involved at all in this project, that basically the very, very beginning of the hearing that was being held by the Joint Review Panel over a couple of years on the DGR, there was an announcement by OPG that they had agreed with SON that they would not move forward with the DGR project without the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation's agreement. So she pointed back to that and said to OPG that was an example of how reconciliation practices can be implemented on the ground. And she then asked OPG in that letter for an updated cumulative effects analysis regarding the impacts on Saugeen Ojibwe Nation before the CEA agency prepares its draft report for public input, and then before she proceeds with her decision-making responsibilities. So there have been no further deadlines or dates specified for the DGR project at this time. All the remaining dates and anticipated deadlines show up as to be determined on the timeline, which is posted as well on the CEA registry. So that's what I wanted to cover. I know it's way more than 20 minutes per day, but it's a lot of projects. And as I mentioned, all those photos I didn't take come from the proponents' project descriptions on the CEA registry, and because of the way I snipped them, are definitely not to scale. CELA's work is always available on our website at cela.ca, and there are many ways to contact us that you can find there. So I'll turn it back to you, Brene, to take over the moderating.
Great, thank you.